into Sports Time HQ. I'm your host, Fernando. Joining with me today is my great co-host, Gary. Of course, Keith is not here once again with us, but Gary's here repping a Miami Marlins hat. Don't know why, but Gary, how are you?
I'm doing pretty good. I just got done telling you I'm very excited for the show. I got some, I think, pretty outlandish numbers, but I'm here for it. I love the hot take, so we'll see.
I know. We were talking just before the show how we both have some good hot takes for today. We're covering the AFC South and the AFC West this week. Last week we covered the North and the East. This week we're refinishing the AFC. Next week we got the start of the NFC. But before we get going, we got to start with some news and notes around the league. First off, Gary, news just came out. T. Higgins is planning on signing his franchise tag today. This came from Adam Schefter. It does seem like there's still a long-term deal that is still a long shot for these two. I don't see that happening. Do you think this could be a sign and trade type of thing, or he's just going to try and ride it out?
Yeah, it's certainly possible for either thing to occur. I didn't actually see this prior to the start of the show, so this is news to me. Yeah, I mean, it's cool, but I really wouldn't be surprised if it's a sign and trade. I think that's what T. Higgins would want instead, because like you had just mentioned, long-term deal is still a long shot. So who really knows what's going to go on there, but we're just right now as an outsider looking in, we're going to look at T. Higgins being a Bengal right now. So.
Yeah, I mean, he's going to be Bengal. We statted him. Did we stat him as a Bengal? We did, right? Yeah, we did. But, I mean, he could be on the move and go somewhere else. Obviously, now it's just going to be whether or not, if the Bengals want him, keep him. But this does hurt Jermaine Burton since he was just drafted. That will hurt him. Some other news that I don't like hearing, but I think it's just not true of a statement. The Vikings believe that there is an untapped potential with QB and Mr. Ghost Sam Darnold, and their plan is to have J.J. McCarthy ride the bench to develop as a quarterback on the bench while watching Sam Darnold play.
That's pretty sad, to be honest with you. I don't know what they or any team in the league still sees in Sam Darnold. I mean, he's not the worst of the worst, but he's not even close to having any sort of potential in the league. So I don't know. We'll see. I'll let you spew whatever BS you want on J.J. McCarthy. Anybody who knows me knows that I'm not a fan of him. Of course, went to Michigan. So, but I don't know. He's got the team around him to be a solid quarterback. So we'll see what he can do. But yeah, that's kind of a crazy thing, honestly.
I mean, you could say that Sam Darnold also has everyone around him to be successful, but I think this is going to be a thing where Sam Darnold might start the first game and then realize that they really know that he's terrible and then put J.J. McCarthy in.
Yeah, that's probably true, yeah.
I mean, that's pretty much it. J.J. McCarthy will be a stud. Let's be real.
I don't know what world you're living in, but we'll see.
I'm living in a world where J.J. McCarthy has a chance to win Rookie of the Year. That's my world.
And that world is so, far-fetched.
Well, moving on to a player that's still looking to try and sign a deal with some type of team is free agent Stephon Gilmore. He's on his 13th year, and he says he's still just waiting for that right opportunity. He's 34 years old. We've seen him thrive in Buffalo and in New England. Obviously, 34 years old for a corner, your speed lacks. I don't know if he's going to be that top corner that he used to be.
Yeah, I mean, he'll probably get a deal somewhere, but I agree with the fact that he's not even close to what he used to be. Solid in Dallas. He was okay in Carolina, I believe. He also went there. But, yeah, he's not even close to what he was back in New England. So who really knows? But I think that he'll be able to sign somewhere. I mean, with a name like Stephon Gilmore, I think you're going to be able to sign somewhere. So,
yeah, I mean, he's got the name, like you said. He has a potential.
Yeah.
Someone who doesn't have potential in their home team is Najee Harris. Obviously, he has fifth-year option declined, but the GM Omar Khan said that it was a business decision. I think we all know that Jaylen Warren is going to be that top dog in Pittsburgh, and that just goes to show that that is the reason why he got his fifth-year option declined, and Najee Harris might be on the move next season for a new team.
Yeah, that's fine with me. I'm not a Steelers fan at all, Browns fan, so I hate him. But I actually am a really big fan of both of the Steelers running backs. I really like Najee. I think he's overhated. I think that they don't use him the right way. So I think that he needs to get out, and I think he'll be so much better when and if he does. Well, he's going to apparently, but I think that it'll be good for him. We've seen it a lot where people just need to move, and they come out and show what their potential was.
Mm-hmm.
And it's also good for Jaylen Warren because I think that the two-headed monster works in his favor. But also, I think you mentioned it and everybody's seeing it. He probably is going to be that top guy this year and at least moving forward. So good. I'm glad that Najee's getting out of there because I think they can both be something special. So.
And then moving on to the Falcons, they have violated the anti-tampering policy. That is what the ruling was by the NFL, which means that they are losing their original 2025 fifth-round pick for next year. The team has to pay a $250,000 fine, and the GM, Terry Fontenot, fined $50,000. This was because not just Kirk Cousins signing, but also Darnell Mooney and Charlie Warner.
Yeah, I don't think they're too upset about that, what they have to lose. But, I think there are a lot of people that were speculating this, and they were right. So.
And I don't know. I mean, it goes right into the Eagles, who did not violate the anti-tampering with Saquon Barkley. And I don't know. I want to figure out, like, what really are they going into trying to figure this out? Because how is two rumors come out that Kirk Cousins, Saquon Barkley could have been the violations, and then all of a sudden one team gets hit, the other team doesn't?
Yeah, that's a great question. Another question for me would be, how many times does tampering actually happen that we just have no idea about?
That's so true. I mean,
probably a lot.
Yeah, I'm sure there's a lot more tampering that we just don't see because either teams just really hide it well, or the NFL maybe just, I don't know, doesn't bother to look into it.
I mean, for example, I really wouldn't be surprised if like Derrick Henry and the Ravens was an example of it, because that's been swirling around forever. So, I mean, or forever, the past year or two. So, I mean, that's definitely a possibility too. I'm not gonna, assume that they did, but I think that if you were to think that it's a possibility, that would probably be one of the examples that comes to my mind.
Exactly, and it just means, like, obviously there was no rumors that there was any tampering, but I mean there was rumors left and right that he was going to go there, right, and he ends up going there.
Exactly.
So, some other news, big news for Trevor Lawrence. He signs a huge extension, 5 years, $275 million. He's now tied with Joe Burrow as the highest paid NFL player, making $55 million a year.
It's just blasphemous to me. I mean,
I was surprised.
Well, here's the thing, right? Like, it's the same with the NBA. You see all these big, huge deals coming out. It's going to happen just due to the fact that money doesn't really have a price anymore. Like, they just throw it out like it's candy. So, I mean, I don't really think that by the time this deal is over, it probably will be just middle of the pack for quarterbacks of good caliber. So, that's that stance. But my problem with it is he really isn't even good caliber. I mean,
Thank you.
He obviously has the potential, and he has shown flashes that he is a great quarterback. But as a whole, I just don't see it. I was never a fan of him because of the Clemson-Ohio State rivalry back-to-back years. So I hated him coming into the league. But, I saw the vision. And last year I thought he got Ridley. He's going to have a great year, and it just didn't turn out that way. So I don't really know what the Jags see. But hopefully for them, they made the right move. I don't know.
They see themselves having the quarterback of the future that they aren't used to. They aren't used to seeing this type of player develop and be somewhat good. I mean, the last time there was someone that was, you could say, somewhat good was Blake Bortles, and he really wasn't even that good.
Yeah.
And I mean, I just don't think he was worth $55 million a year, 5 years, $275. Like, I really thought that they were going to see what he does this season, and if he doesn't develop the way that they want, that they could move on from him and maybe draft a future quarterback.
Right.
Now that just makes it a whole lot harder. They've now locked him, and they can't move on from him. So if he becomes trash, don't worry. You have yourselves Mac Jones.
Oh, Jesus. Oh, my God.
It's not good. Not good. I'll tell you what. Not good. But some last news. Moving on to the last news. Tom Brady was inducted into the Patriots Hall of Fame. Gary, did you get to go to that?
So I didn't, but yeah, I for anybody that doesn't know, I work literally half a mile down the street from Gillette. So I got out an hour early. Normally we get out some time early just due to the fact that they shut down one half of the street to add a third lane for traffic to go to Gillette. So it was kind of, messed up getting out of there. But yeah, that's why we got out early. I saw everybody going to it. Apparently there was like 60,000. I heard
it was a packed house.
Yeah, it was. I mean, it was only $30 to get in. So, I mean, I probably would have gone no matter what. But I had a lot of stuff going on that night and worked the next day. I have to get up really early for work, so I just wasn't even thinking about going, but it was a really cool thing. I watched a live stream of it, so congrats to him. It was obviously going to happen, so yeah, it was cool.
Do you think he should have signed that one-day contract and retire as a Patriot?
I do. I think that every athlete actually should do that, especially if they leave on good terms. I mean, there was always the rumors of, Brady and Belichick and Kraft having, some sort of conflict when they all broke up. I really don't think that's true. I mean, you win 6 Super Bowls as a unit, there can't possibly be.
Why are they always there? They were there at the roast. They were here. Like,
right. Exactly.
Obviously, it could be just all professional, but why would you invite them to the roast?
Exactly. I really don't think that there was any major, at least, conflict that would have, prevented anything to happen. But that's I think that he should have signed that one-day contract. Like I said, I think all big major athletes, like for example LeBron, I think should sign one day with Cleveland. And I'm not just saying that because I'm a Cavs fan, but I really just think that like I said, I think all big athletes should sign back just to say they ended with the team that they produced the most on.
Yeah, I mean, he got a statue. He's getting a statue for himself, and the number 12 is been retired for the Patriots. So anyone who's looking for number 12 for the Patriots, you got to go somewhere else. Yeah, you got to go somewhere else. Yeah, and it was crazy to think that this was on a Wednesday, too. It was sold out. And not to mention that down the street in Boston, there was also another sold-out crowd with the Boston Celtics.
Yeah.
So Massachusetts, managed to fill 2 big stadiums, Foxborough and TD Garden, in the same night. Both sold out.
Yeah, that's great.
It's impressive to think about.
It is.
I do want to ask, did you see, so you said you watched the live stream. I watched it a little bit as well. Did you see Peyton Manning and Tom Brady? Did you hear about that private workout that they had?
I didn't, but I saw he was there. That's pretty much it. But no, I didn't hear that.
So back when they were coming off of, I think 2008 or 2009, I can't remember, their like MVP seasons, Manning hit up Brady to go down to Tennessee under the radar. Brady decides to take Kraft's plane, so it wasn't really under the radar for him. Mm-hmm. And they ended up working out together over the summer and working out with high school football players. And they took their phones. That way no one could like record anything or anything. Yeah. And they said, if you tell anyone, we're going to kill you. Obviously, they're not going to. But, I mean, high school football players down in Tennessee getting the chance to do that, That's amazing. To get throws from Tom Brady, Peyton Manning.
Yeah, no, I mean, I've never played actual organized football in my life, but we talk about it every day. So obviously we love the game. That would just be a dream come true for any sports fan.
Exactly. So, but that's all the news and notes. Unless, Gary, you got any news and notes?
Not at all. Let's get into this.
Let's get into it. We're going to start with the Denver Broncos, the team that 1 year ago had Russell Wilson. This time it's the Knicks Nation, Bo Nix coming in. Gary, I'm going to be honest. I could be adjusting the stats on this, but I do have Bo Nix over 4,000 passing yards. He finishes with 315 fantasy points. That's enough to be a QB6. I need to adjust this because there's no way in the world does he do this, but that's what I have right now.
Yeah, I would definitely say that you need to adjust that as well. Did you have a split with Zach Wilson? Did you have him as QB2 or did you have Stidham?
I had Jarrett Stidham as QB2.
That's fine. Did you have a split there?
I had a 93-7 split.
Oh, okay. I went as high as 80-20 with Zach Wilson.
Okay.
So I don't know. I just think that rookie quarterback coming in, and he wasn't one of the highest ones. So I think they're going to be kind of lenient. I mean, Zach Wilson's awful, but at least he's played. So who knows there? But I don't have Bo Nix doing that. I have him having 3,000 yards, 22 and 15 on the touchdown interception ratio. So I only have him finishing with 220 points, which is good for QB 20 of what last year's stats would be. So
QB 20. I did mess up. I didn't include the interceptions on that.
Okay.
He finishes with 282, which is QB 11.
Yeah, still relatively high, but
still relatively high.
Definitely not QB 6.
Yeah, thank goodness. I knew something was wrong. I had to double check real quick because I was like, there's no way this is right. Yeah. I mean, that's not bad. QB 20 is kind of more where I'm going to have to adjust my stats, but I think it's because I have some opportunity for a lot of receiving yards. I think Javonte Williams is going to get some good receiving, but it's going to be more Samaje Perine that's going to get most of it in the running back category. For you, I want to ask you, do you have Javonte Williams being that number one back there?
I actually never have. Even when he got there, like he was drafted there at a UNC. I know a lot of people liked him just due to the fact that he was a built back and he could catch the ball if needed, but he was a more dominant rusher. I really just never liked him. Injury has always been an issue for him. I actually have him finishing under 200 fantasy points.
Wow.
I have it 191, which is good for last year's RB 24. So
that's an interesting one because you know where how many fantasy points I gave him? I gave him enough to be running back 36.
Wow.
140 fantasy points. I think he is going to be in a committee over there.
Yeah.
I actually have Williams with 140 fantasy points. McLaughlin, because I'm just McLovin him, I have him at 138. And then I have Perine with 118.
Yeah, I also have those guys over 100. But I got Samaje Perine just outing McLaughlin, but I wouldn't be surprised if any of them take the reins as the running back 1, 2, or 3, whatever. I don't know what it's going to finish out as. I think Javonte will be the one, but I don't really think it'll be by a crazy amount. I have never liked him, and he's kind of just a value merchant, meaning the amount of carries that he gets, because he doesn't really run for hefty yards per carry, and he doesn't really get a lot of ones. So, but he's also injury prone. So
yeah, I'm going to be honest, and I'm sure you're going to agree with this too. I think before this season comes up, if you have him in Dynasty, you have to trade him away and get whatever you can from him because I think this is the last time.
There'll still be people that'll take him too. I know a few people that are still high on him.
It's the name. That's what it is. He had that
But
decent season, and now they're like, oh, this guy's really good. But he's really not that good if you really look at his stats.
Yeah, he's really not.
I mean, I have him with 175 rushing attempts. Right behind him is McLaughlin with 141. There's not much of a difference, and I still could change that up a little bit where I could give McLaughlin more. But I think Pirine is going to be the guy to be the receiving back there. I don't see him rushing a lot. He's going to be more the receiving guy.
Yeah, I completely agree. I mean, I actually gave Javonte Williams 220 attempts. I gave him the majority of the carries, but I completely agree with you. I have Pirine having almost triple the amount of receiving yards that Javonte has. One more touchdown. So yeah. That's definitely not going to be a question at all. I just I can't trust Javonte Williams.
I can't trust him either. And if you trust him, anyone who's watching, good luck.
Good luck. Yeah,
you got to trade him away. You got to get whatever you can for him because he's not going to be worth it after this season. He's going to be worth a side bag of peanuts. Going into the receivers, this is why Bo Nix has a lot of passing yards, and the reason why is I actually have a new wide receiver 1 in Denver. Cortland Sutton is not going to be finishing as the most yards on this team. He does finish with the most fantasy points though, 212.8. That's good enough for the wide receiver 27, which that goes to show you if he finishes with the most. Stay away from Denver. Marvin Mims, I have finishing with over 1,000 receiving yards, just over 1,000 receiving yards, and he finishes with 206 fantasy points.
Wow.
That's good enough to be a wide receiver 30.
Wow, that is crazy.
I have a feeling this week we're gonna be different. I noticed that last week we were too similar.
Yeah, I completely agree. I mean. So here's the thing with me, right? So I actually have just about 4 I have 4 wide receivers finishing over 100 fantasy points in Denver. But the least is Marvin Mims.
Wow.
106. So I have Cortland Sutton being the wide receiver 1. I really can't see any world where he's not. If he were to not be, it would be Josh Reynolds for me. It just would.
How many fantasy points did you give Josh Reynolds?
128.
I gave him just shy of 80 points.
Wow. Okay. I mean, it's the Broncos. Anything can happen, to be honest, with these wideouts. They're all pretty bad for the most part. But, like, we've seen Josh Reynolds in Detroit, and he actually wasn't bad at all. So, if like it were to be just like a really, really weird season for Denver, which I'm expecting it to be, I wouldn't be surprised if he leads them in receiving yards. I have Troy Franklin finishing with 610 yards. Former teammate back at Oregon with Knicks, so who knows if that connection is probably going to be there. But yeah,
I thought of his connection too.
Yeah, I wouldn't draft any of these guys though. I have Cortland Sutton finishing with 162. Fantasy points, which
my goodness.
Yeah, not even good enough to draft at that point where whatever his value may be. That's good for wide receiver 41 of last year. So
you're saying the best wide receiver in Denver is finishing as the wide receiver 41.
I mean, I think they'll all finish around that. I have them all finishing around that same spot. So it's like,
here's the issue. And I think this is why it's so different for us. It's because Denver is the biggest question mark, I think. One of the biggest question mark teams.
I agree.
Like, anything can happen. Like, I have Troy Franklin as the 3rd wide receiver, where I have Josh Reynolds being the 4th. Yeah. And I think Troy Franklin could easily go above Marvin Mims or Cortland Sutton. There is a chance because of the connection that Bo Nix and Troy Franklin had in college. And I mean, as for tight ends, Adam Troutman, he has a good name. Trade him because I only have him finishing with 64.3. I don't even know if I want to give you the stat on 64.3. That's tight end 38.
Yeah, I got him at 89.5. So a little bit more lenient, but still wouldn't even look his way.
Yeah, exactly. But I mean, that's not bad. I mean, for our first team of the week, for the AFC West. But let's get into maybe a team that might do a little bit better, but not too much better. The Las Vegas Raiders. This is another team that has some QB situation that will need to be figured out this season. And Gary, I'm going to ask you, who is your QB1?
So my QB1 is Minshew, but not by crazy.
Yeah,
amount.
what's the QB split there?
I went 60-40.
Wow. I went 55-45, and I went with Mr. Minshew Magic.
Okay. Yeah. So we should be relatively similar in this department, at least in terms of stat ratio with him and O'Connell.
I have Minshew finishing with 167 fantasy points.
I am at 194. So that makes sense with where the split comes in.
Yep. I have him with just over 2,500 passing yards, 17 touchdowns, 7 interceptions. And that's pretty much it. He does rush, not enough to get over 100 rushing yards, but he does get a rushing touchdown.
Okay, so I actually gave him decent rushing yards. I gave him 156 and 4 touchdowns.
Oh, wow. Okay, that's where it really differs.
Yeah, but I do have him right around – I have him at just over 2,500 yards. I have him at 19 and 12 ratio. So the interceptions also is where the split comes in. But, yeah, I'm intrigued to actually see what you have for Zamir White.
So I'm going to be honest, coming into the league, I was really hyped with him. I love Zamir White. And I think there is a world where Zamir White has a chance to be the RB1. Is it the Las Vegas Raiders? I don't know. I have him a good split, roughly a similar split with Alexander Madison, unfortunately, because Madison has had decent years as an RB1 running back. I actually have Madison finishing just a little bit more in PPR leagues than Zamir White. I have Zamir finishing with 130 fantasy points. That's enough to be an RB39.
Okay, so this is probably our biggest difference so far. I like Zamir White, and I think that he does have that potential. They used him a lot last year. I think they're going to use him much more this year. I had Alexander Madison taking a clear back seat. I actually have Zamir White finishing with 211 fantasy points.
Wow.
Good enough for RB17 of last year. So not like anything spectacular, but still certainly playable. I have him at 900 yards, 7 touchdowns, and fair receiving work with 241 receiving yards and 3 touchdowns. So, nothing crazy, but I do think that he'll take a commanding RB1 lead and certainly playable in fantasy.
I got him 744 rushing yards. There is a 2 touchdown difference between White and Madison. I have White with 4, Madison with 6. And then obviously Madison, I have a little bit more with the receptions and the targets, both of them getting 1 receiving touchdown. So it could be, again, this is another thing that could be completely different. Madison might be really taking a back seat. And like you said, like your team, like you have your team. But again, it could be completely opposite. I mean, we could see Madison as the RB1, Zamir White just never breaking out to his potential. But I do love White, and I really hope there is a way. And just the person in the way is Madison. And that's going to determine whether or not White is going to be fantasy relevant, in my opinion. For the wide receivers, though, does Davante Adams still maintain wide receiver 1 or low or high-end wide receiver 2 status?
Of course. Come on. Are you kidding me? I don't know if you know this about me. Maybe you do.
I know this about
yes,
you.
You do. I love Davante Adams. I think that he's still in contention for the most skilled and best wide receiver in the league. I don't understand why not. If you're a stat watcher, then I guess you could say what you want, but I don't really recall what he finished last year, but I'm pretty sure he was top 5 in so many, just about every wide receiver stat. I think he led in touchdowns.
Finished as wide receiver 10.
Okay, so fantasy-wise, he was wide receiver 10. But, I mean, if you're wide receiver 10 with Aiden O'Connell throwing you footballs, I'm going to look your way every time.
Yeah.
I have him finishing with another 1,000-plus yard season, 1,166 and 9 touchdowns. That is good enough for 275.5 points. Good enough for wide receiver 9 of last year.
Wow. Well, I would say ours isn't completely different, but I do have him not surpassing 1,000 receiving yards.
Crazy.
I think with the QB play, it's going to really mess things up. He's going to be close to 1,000. He's going to have 944, but he does finish as the wide receiver 16 from last year, 233 fantasy points. He still maintains a high-end wide receiver too.
I don't like it.
You don't like it because you're a
it.
Davante Adams believer. But with the QB play being all over the place, I just don't see a world where he's going to maintain. His age is getting up there, Gary. There's a time where they fall off. They fall off.
So good. I don't care.
Davante Adams is not finishing as a wide receiver 1 this season.
You're ridiculous. But okay.
There is new big wideouts that are coming into this league that they're new. They're the next Pizzazz.
Yeah, maybe in like 2 more years. Maybe like 2 more years, but not right now.
Unfortunately, those 2 years was 2 years ago.
Okay, sure. Whatever you want to say.
But Jacoby Myers, I have him finishing as 174 fantasy points. Again, similar to where I think he finished last year. He would be wide receiver 38. I got to figure out where he finished last year, but it was somewhere similar to that. Jacoby Myers finished as wide receiver 24 last year.
Yeah, I got him around the exact same spot. I think I had 169, which is good for wide receiver 38. I've always been a good fan of Jacoby Myers. I think that what the Patriots did was just wrong, getting rid of him and then signing Juju to the exact same deal.
Thank you.
I did not understand it at all because Juju is awful and has been forever. So, I think Jacoby Myers is a really good, solid player. I'm finishing with 741 and 5 touchdowns. Was never really a touchdown getter until his last season in New England. I don't really remember. I think he had 3 or 4. And then he came out and actually started really well with Las Vegas last year. So I would expect him to pick up pretty much the same thing.
Now, I'm curious with Brock Bowers, with one of the greatest tight ends in college football history. I want to hear your take on him, and I want to hear how you have him finishing in the Raiders.
So, yeah, I really didn't know what to do, to be honest with you, because, like you said, I am a Davante Adams believer. So I think that he's going to get a crazy amount of the target percentage. I gave him 28.5. So I think what I was looking at was had Darren Waller fit with this team, and I don't think that he got the amount of potential that he really had, to be honest with you. He was good for a year or two, and then they just stopped throwing the ball. And I don't think that we've seen the Raiders tight end get the ball like he had, during his first year or two. We thought Michael Mayer was going to come out and be really good, and he really didn't do anything. So I'm going to stop beating around the bush. I have Brock Bowers at 500 yards and 4 touchdowns. So I don't know if that's comparable to what you have him at. But
what do you have him finishing in fantasy?
Yeah, I got you 1 second. So I got him at 135.5 fantasy points, which is good enough for tight end 15. Okay.
Well, this might be a little different, maybe a little bit more than that. I have him finishing with 972 receiving yards, 4 touchdowns. He is the new face of the franchise, being a first-round pick, and he finishes with 188 fantasy points. That is good enough to be the tight end 7.
Okay. I mean, I don't hate it at all. I
think he's better than Kyle Pitts, that's for sure.
I mean, Brock Bowers is a stud, so I wouldn't be surprised if he just immediately goes off, but I just don't know. I think the quarterback play influences that too, of course.
Just like how it influences Davante Adams.
It does. But I mean, 1166 is like a bad season for him. So
yeah.
I mean, I don't know. We'll see. This team is god awful. So
you really think wide receiver 1 Davante Adams is staying as a wide receiver 1?
I don't see why he wouldn't be. I mean, he did it last year. What was he last year? Wide
receiver 10.
Yeah. So I mean, I I really can't see a world where he's not. I don't think that there's going to be too much. I mean, I'm looking at these wide receivers right now, and the only one that I would expect to be top 10 and or above him in that is Jamar Chase, who finished behind him at wide receiver 11. So, yeah, I don't really think much is going to change. I'm looking at his stats right now. What I have him at is just about the exact same stats he had. I'm at 1166 and 9 touchdowns. He had 1144 and 8. So I do. I think he's going to be exactly the same.
Unfortunately, it's just not going to be the case. But if you want him in our leagues and I have him, I'm sure I'll be fine to sell him to you.
Oh, you have him?
I don't know if I do, but if I do, I'll give you Nick Chubb and Devontae Adams for someone. I got you. Don't worry.
Okay.
But
I'll give you Aiden O'Connell.
All right. But we're 2 teams in with the AFC West, going into 2 of the better teams. Let's go into the Los Angeles Chargers. Justin Herbert, he lost a lot of his wide receivers that he's been playing with, like Keenan Allen, Mike Williams. They're no longer there. Austin Eckler, no longer there. This is almost a completely different team. This is half the Chargers and half the Ravens with the running back situation. So I'll start with Justin Herbert finishing. He has a solid season, finishing just above 4,800 yards, 40 touchdowns, 12 interceptions. He has 2 rushing touchdowns. He finishes with 365 fantasy points. That's enough for the QB3.
So you said 40 touchdowns?
Yeah, I had him getting a lot of touchdowns. And I think the reason why is I have double digits for Joshua Palmer. He likes to throw it to Palmer in the end zone.
All right. Okay. I'd love to see it. I'm not going to lie. This was one of the teams that I really wanted to talk about. And you'll see why in a little bit. But so Herbert, I have 46-31 yards, 30 and 10 touchdown interception ratio. Gave him some rushing. He finishes with 343.2 fantasy points. Good enough for QB4 from last year. Edging
so
out.
We're right around.
Yeah, I mean, I think he's going to return back to what we know Herbert can be. It's just the fact that he lost his 2 guys. Can he be what he was a few years ago now? And that's definitely a question that for some will be easy to answer. But I still believe in Justin Herbert. So, yeah, I think he's due for a good season.
Okay. Now, what about the running back situation? Is there a world where Gus Edwards or J.K. Dobbins hits over 1,000 rushing yards?
So I don't see that, but I do see Gus Edwards having a monster season.
Oh. Give me the news on the bus.
I gave him a lot of receiving work, which he normally doesn't get. But
really?
He normally doesn't get that, and I gave him a lot, yeah. So I think that Herbert's had Eckler for his whole career, and it's just going to be too much to shy away from. And as much as I love J.K. Dobbins, he is not a receiving back at all. Or he is, but he's injury prone, so I wouldn't be surprised if he doesn't get a lot of work in this year. So I have Gus Edwards finishing with 242.4 fantasy points, which is good enough for running back 9 of last year.
Yeah, this is me with my screen frozen this time because that's jaw-dropping. I don't have him around that. I have him about 50 points under that. I only have him getting 10 targets, getting 9 receptions.
Mm-hmm.
He does have 2 touchdowns from those 10 targets, but really what his fantasy points come from is 12 rushing touchdowns. He finishes just about over 100 shy of 1,000, finishing with 191.2 fantasy points. That's good enough to be the RB24, which is an RB2, which I think I'm fine drafting him as an RB2, low-end RB2, high-end RB3 flex play. And I think that's solid, but I don't see him getting that much targets. I have J.K. Dobbins getting the most targets with the running back group. But again, like you said, there is an issue with his receiving. I mean,
right.
with his injury proneness.
Right.
That is the only concern. But I have him finishing with the whole season, you know? I'm hoping he finishes with the whole season. But again, I just don't. I don't know. That's a hot take right there. That's a hot take.
I know it is. And
Gus Edwards finishing.
I know.
Top
as
10
I was doing it, I was like, I don't like this, but you know what? It's what it came out to. I don't know. I have him having 30 catches, so it's like, which he normally isn't around at all. But like I said, I just think it's going to be too much for Herbert to shy away from. If they have Kamani Vidal or Isaiah Spiller be the receiving back, then I'm just so far gone that I couldn't have predicted that. But I think that it's going to be one of these two guys. And if you had to give me the choice, which one it'll be Edwards, just due to the fact that I don't know if JK can stay on the field. And he's much more of the powerful runner. So, yeah, we'll see. I think it would be cool, though, to see Gus Edwards just be an absolute unit in Los Angeles and just shock a lot of people.
Interesting. I have, going into the wide receivers, I have 3 wide receivers getting 90-plus targets. Joshua Palmer, Quentin Johnston, and then Ladd McConkey. I actually really like Ladd McConkey. None of these players, though, reach over 1,000 receiving yards. McConkey does finish with the most receiving yards with 979, but Joshua Palmer finishes with 11 touchdowns. Joshua Palmer is my wide receiver 1 in fantasy for the Chargers. He finishes with 213.9 fantasy points. That's good enough to be a wide receiver 26.
Yeah, I don't have that. I actually have a lack of production from this group. I have Josh Palmer finishing with the most, which is only 155 fantasy points.
Wow, you're brutal out here.
Yeah, I definitely went a different route than you. But, I have 4 Chargers wide receivers finishing with over 500 receiving yards, DJ Chark included. I think I probably gave more work to the tight end group than you. That's probably where
I don't think so.
No, really.
Who's your tight end 1 there? Because I have Hayden Hurst as the tight end 1.
I have Disley, but it's close.
Okay, it's pretty close. It's about 27 fantasy points different. Hayden Hurst finishes as like a tight end 17 with 127 fantasy points.
Okay, so what did you say Hurst was again? What did you say he finished with?
127 fantasy points.
Okay, yeah, I finished Will Disley with 125.
Okay, so we have it just a little bit more for Disley for you, more for Hurst for me.
Yeah, and then I think that's good for tight end 17 of last year.
Yeah. Yep. So we have whoever we think is the tight end 1 in Los Angeles. That's who we have.
Yeah.
So, all right, let's go into the biggest team, the Super Bowl champs. I'm be honest. Looking at this team, I hate the Kansas City Chiefs.
Dude,
but their wide receiver core is so much better. I'm glad you're in the same boat as me because I could not believe it. I could not fathom that Kansas City really changed their whole wide receiver core.
A lot better. They're going to three-peat. They're going to three-peat. I don't care.
I really hope not, but I think they will. Patrick Mahomes, he finishes with 35 passing touchdowns, 15 interceptions, 4,700 yards. He finishes for me 335 fantasy points. That's good enough for the QB5.
Yeah, I got him at 364. Good enough for QB3. Okay. I think he gets back on track, at least in the fantasy game. I'm at 47.55 yards, 36 touchdowns, 10 picks. Gave him some rushing work.
Yeah, me too.
I think he's going to be back in the fantasy game. We've been waiting for him to enter back into that top 3. And, I think you're going to get it right here because he was the first quarterback drafted in multiple years, but he finished around 5 to 7 range.
Yeah.
Last couple years, yeah, he finished at 8 last year. So,
I actually do have him finishing as the QB3. I read 335, but it's 353.
Okay.
So yeah, right around where you have him. For running backs, though, I actually have Isaiah Pacheco over 1,000 rushing yards. He finishes with 248 fantasy points. That's enough to be the RB8.
I like it. I don't have him at 1,000. I'm at 876, but I gave him 8 touchdowns and not a lot, but a good amount of receiving work. So I have him at 220 fantasy points. That's good enough for RB 15, where he finished last year.
Okay. So he's just going to improve.
Right. I think he'll have better stats. But he finishes pretty much the same spot where he finished last year. I wouldn't be surprised, though, if he cracks that top 10 and willingly does so. Yeah.
For the wide receiver core, obviously, you and I both talked how it has gotten drastically better, having Hollywood Brown. I was trying to do the stats on Marquise Brown. Turns out he doesn't exist anymore. It's Hollywood Brown.
Yep.
Yeah, they've officially changed the stats. It's officially Hollywood Brown. And Xavier Worthy, I still just don't see him being so relevant. I actually do see him getting some rushing work, though, with his speed. But Rashee Rice, he becomes that guy once again. He eclipses 1,000 receiving yards, 8 touchdowns. He finishes with 238 fantasy points. Last year, he finished as the wide receiver 27. With that 238 fantasy points, he finishes as the wide receiver 16.
Okay, so I believe I just off of eyeball, I probably have him finishing right around where he finished last year with my points. I actually gave Xavier Worthy a good amount of points. What'd you have for him?
116.
Okay, so I gave him 153. So you said you gave him some rushing work?
Yeah, it was only 11 attempts for 39 yards.
Did you give him any touchdowns?
No, not. Okay, I gave him 2 receiving touchdowns, no rushing.
Okay, so I gave him 60 yards and 2 touchdowns. That's probably where most of the difference comes. But I think he'll be solid. I have him at 660 yards. I have 3 Kansas City wide receivers over 150 fantasy points. All 3 being relatively relevant. I have Rashee Rice finishing at 191.5.
Okay.
Like I said, I assume that's going to be – I didn't even look yet. That's probably around where he finished. Wide receiver, you said 27? Yeah, that's good enough for wide receiver 34. So close.
So you have him taking a little dip. But that makes sense because they're going to – if better wide receivers came in, Patrick Mahomes is going to pass the ball to different people.
I think Travis Kelce is still going to be around, obviously. So – I think Marquise Brown's going to get a good amount of shares. I mean, what I thought was crazy when researching this team was Marquise Brown has had over 100 targets, like in numerous consecutive years.
Yeah, I saw that. He's gotten it, I think, 3 or 4 straight seasons.
Yeah, with 100 plus targets. I was crazy to think. So I just gave him 100 again. But
I gave him 92. I didn't think he was going to hit 100.
Yeah, I gave him 100, but his catch percentage is low, so it's like that's what hurt him the most.
Yep.
But I think he's gonna be good for this team, no matter what, whether he has good stats or not. He's gonna be a key piece to this team, and
very true.
I think he's gonna be a solid player. So.
You mentioned Travis Kelce. There's no world where Travis Kelce is still not being drafted as a tight end 1 because he deserves to be the tight end 1. Right. For me, he finishes as the tight end 1 once again. Last season, Sam Laporta was that with 239 fantasy points. This year, Travis Kelce finishes with 249 fantasy points, just getting over 1,000 receiving yards, 9 touchdowns, over 123 targets.
So I actually didn't give him enough to be tight end 1 from last year.
Wow.
Tight end 2, 236.6, finishing just under Sam Laporta by a few points. I didn't have him eclipsing 1,000. I have him actually dropping off a little bit in the receiving yards by about 80. I have him at 901. Still 8 touchdowns, but I gave him 2 rushing touchdowns.
You think he's going to get some rushing work?
Do that stupid stuff that always sneaks in 1 or 2 in the rushing game. So I did give him those few points there. But, I'm no matter what this says, I'm still going to draft him as tight end 1. So should everybody else.
Yep. And that's how we end the AFC West. Tight end 1, Travis Kelce. But the AFC South gets even more interesting. We're going to start, though, with the Indianapolis Colts. Anthony Richardson, he's back. But does he have enough? to be a fantasy-worthy quarterback. Gary, for Indianapolis, for me, I have Anthony Richardson finishing with 330 fantasy points. And the reason why is because he's a rusher. And I gave him 9 rushing touchdowns, over 594 yards with 110 rushing attempts. That has been the biggest reason why he had 330, because I only had him with 3,800 yards, 20 touchdowns, and 8 interceptions.
I thought you were going to get on my ass for this today. I'm not going to lie, but I have him at 340.
Okay. So we have him right around you have him as QB4. I have him as QB5.
As much as I don't like him, that's the thing. I don't.
I don't like him either. I don't like him either.
Colts, that's the thing. I don't think the Colts are going to be good, but that rushing is what puts him up there. I gave him only 90 attempts, but I gave him 10 touchdowns. And I probably gave him a little bit more passing work. I gave him a 26-9 ratio with 3,600 yards. And I gave Joe Flacco a 10% split too, just in case. So I didn't even give him the full stats. So, like I said, I don't like him, but he's got the rushing capability that he flashed in those 4 games that he played last year. Yep. So, yeah, I might look to draft him.
I might have to too, but again, for anyone who's watching that doesn't do stats like Gary and I and Keith do, I mean, we're really doing stats based on the catching percentage, yards per carry, what they're averaging, and it's just mind-boggling to see sometimes. Like Richardson, you and I don't like, but there's a world where Richardson does do really good in fantasy because of his rushing ability. Speaking of rushing ability, Jonathan Taylor finds his way back as an RB1, and he finishes with 236 fantasy points. Good enough for the RB11 from last year. He has 12 rushing touchdowns, 1,185 rushing yards.
Don't see it.
I knew you could differ because there's a lot of mixed emotions with JT.
I want to like him because I drafted him so many times, and I had him for his crazy year where he finished RB1. But I can't, man. I have him finishing just under 200 points.
Wow.
Which, yeah, it's good enough for like the RB20 range where DeAndre Swift was last year. So, I don't know. I gave him 900 rushing yards and 10 touchdowns, but not really any receiving work. I just don't know with him. I want to like him, but I don't think I can.
What did you give Sermon?
I gave Sermon 675.
Rushing yards?
Yeah, I did.
Wow.
I think it's just due to the fact that they had another guy last year in Zach Moss, and not necessarily saying that Trey Sermon's going to live up to that, but I think that they're not just going to shy away from using a second guy.
Yeah, Richardson.
That's another reason why I didn't give JT what you might expect. I think he's just going to be so good in the rushing game. So, but yeah, I mean, OSU's own Trey Sermon, who knows? No, I only gave him 100 fantasy points. So it's not like anything crazy, but
I actually gave him more. I gave him 126 fantasy points.
Yeah, I only gave him 100.
Yeah. Moving on to the wide receivers, 245 fantasy points coming from Michael Pittman. That 245.9 is good enough as the wide receiver 15. Michael Pittman's a stud. I like him a lot. And he's just going to be one of the top dogs in Indianapolis. Other than that, A.D. Mitchell, this is his rookie season. I don't think he's that great. And I think he's got some time to work himself out with this team. Pittman's going to be wide receiver 1, and I really think Josh Downs is still the wide receiver 2, and he's locked as wide receiver 2.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. I have Pittman finishing with 235.5, good for wide receiver 16. Eclipsing 1,000 yards, but I like Josh Downs. He's speedy. He's got that big home run play potential. I have him finishing with 750 and 4 touchdowns. Good enough for 162.5. I'm not sure how relevant that is. That's good for
that's Josh Downs, 162.5.
Yeah.
I have Josh Downs with exactly 162.5.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow. That's crazy. I don't know how that works out, but that's exactly good for wide receiver 41.
Yeah.
So not awful, but
He could be a sneaky flex play.
yeah, I completely agree with that. Unlike given weeks where there's a good matchup or someone that you need to take the top off of a weak secondary, he's your guy, I think, because Michael Pittman's the more every play guy. But Josh Downs, like I said, he's got that home run play capability. So as for A.D. Mitchell, I have him just short of 500 yards, but definitely a clear wide receiver 3 over Alec Pierce. I gave him 4 touchdowns as well.
I gave him 3 touchdowns, 576 receiving yards, 119 fantasy points. But those are the only 3 really receiving players, because tight ends, there's really nothing. Kylan Granson I had as the tight end 1, and he only finished with 71.1. And I'm not looking, for anyone who's asking, what tight end is that? I'm not looking at that because he's irrelevant.
I agree.
So moving on to the Tennessee Titans. Gary, do you like these Titans? Derrick Henry, he's gone. Will Levis, I mean, he's that guy, he's going to be that QB1 there. What do you see in Will Levis over there in Tennessee?
Absolutely nothing. I don't. I think it's the same thing when I was looking. So, like, not the same thing, but what you had said about the Chiefs, where you hate them because their lineup looks so good. The same thing here. I think what I see, I'm going to hide the quarterback position. Everybody down below the quarterback position, I like.
Amazing.
Right. I love it. I love what they have. I love what they've built. To think that Treylon Burks was their wide receiver 1 like 2 or 3 years ago whenever they had drafted him.
It's crazy.
Now he's by far their wide receiver 4. Like, it is crazy. But I hate Will Levis. I don't like him at all. And as much as I say it, that I don't like him, I actually gave him solid stats. But that's
really
plainly due to the fact that he's got a studded out offense.
I only gave him 262.9 fantasy points. It's good enough for only QB 15.
Yeah, I gave him 267, but I still think that's like good. Like, I think what'd you say?
You could have like,
I think it's QB 15 for me.
Yeah, QB 15.
So yeah, I think that even that is lenient. I just don't like Will Levis. I don't like how a player he is. I know a lot of people do, but I don't see it.
I'm going to jump to the wide receivers first before going to Tony Pollard and these running backs. DeAndre Hopkins, he finished as the wide receiver 22 last year with 223 points, and he was the leading wide receiver in that crew. He's the leading receiver in this crew as well, but he only gets 185 fantasy points, which is good enough for wide receiver 36. I hate to break it, but the quarterback position is what's holding back Calvin Ridley, DeAndre Hopkins, and even Tyler Boyd. I'm a big Tyler Boyd fan, and Calvin Ridley 169, DeAndre Hopkins 185, Tyler Boyd 141. And the reason why is because the quarterback play, like you said, Will Levis, he's the reason why these wide receivers are not going to do as great. Never been a Ridley fan since he left Atlanta, and he hasn't been good since that whole gambling situation. And I just don't see a world where he becomes relevant again, like as relevant as what he used to be. And I think DeAndre Hopkins is still the wide receiver 1 there.
I completely agree with that. The only thing I don't agree with is DeAndre Hopkins is pretty much allergic to bad play no matter who his quarterback is.
Yeah.
I just looked at his stats last year. He had 1070 and 7 touchdowns. So I think that he's going to have around the same thing. I gave him 1,001 receiving yards. Wow. So chalk up another 1,000-yard season for him. I gave him 8 touchdowns. I have him finishing at 220 points. Good enough for wide receiver 24. I was definitely more lenient with Calvin Ridley. I gave him 210, which is probably around the same spot. You said 141 for Boyd. I gave him 143. So I don't know. I don't like this Titans team just due to the fact that Will Levis is their quarterback. But literally, if you had any other like top 15 quarterback in the league on their team, they would be such a sneaky good team. But I don't think so.
No. And even like Chigozie Okonkwo, I love the dude. That was the guy that Keith and I talked about all last season. He's been that guy. And I think he still can be a great tight end in the league, but the quarterback play, again, the problem. He only finishes with 133 fantasy points, which is good enough for tight end 16.
I wasn't even that lenient. I gave him under 100. So.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
But going to the running backs, RB1, Tony Pollard in the building for Tennessee Titans. He finishes for me 206.5 fantasy points, good enough for a RB18, which is, again, I think it's good. This whole team is going to hold everyone back because of the quarterback.
So what did you do for Tajay Spears?
Tajay Spears, I gave him 529 rushing yards. I gave him a little bit more targets, which means he had a little bit more receiving yards. Both of them had a touchdown for receiving touchdowns, but Tony Pollard had 7 rushing. Tajay Spears had 3. He finished with 141 fantasy points.
I don't know if you're gonna like this. I don't know, but I read a link a couple days ago that the Titans absolutely love
Spears
and the thought of having a 2-headed monster running back committee. So that definitely influenced me. I gave Tajay Spears almost 1,000 rushing yards. And Tony Pollard just short of 900. So
wow.
In the rushing category, I have Tajay Spears taking the reins. Fantasy-wise, I have Pollard edging out Tajay Spears by 13 fantasy points. I have Tony Pollard at 229.7. That's good enough for RB 13 from last year. Saquon Barkley.
You're saying Spears is an RB1?
Well, that was Pollard.
Oh,
that was Pollard. I have Spears at 216, which is RB 15 for Pacheco.
Wow. So you're telling me you could draft Pollard or Spears?
I do. I am. Yeah. I think that they want to use that 2-headed back, and I mean they're both going to be relevant in the receiving game. Not anything crazy, but I gave them 300, 350 yards apiece. But I think the rushing category is going to be split almost 50-50.
So let me ask you this. If in redraft leagues, Tony Pollard was going in the 4th round, Spears was going in the 6th round, who are you taking?
I'd take Spears.
Okay. Just curious. What your take was on that. I would draft Pollard only because I don't have Spears getting that much.
All right. I mean, I also think that because Will Levis is their quarterback, they're going to be down in a lot of games too. So, like, they might just have to run a lot of, quick drives and 2-minute plays. So, I think they're going to use Spears a lot more in those packages than Pollard too. So I don't really know, but yeah, pretty much the overall theme you're getting from this, guys, is that Will Levis is awful, and he's going to be the one that holds this team back.
Mm-hmm. So. No, I agree. I agree with that. 2 more teams to go. 2 top-heavy teams, very good teams. Jacksonville Jaguars. Well, sort of good, Jacksonville. Jaguars, Trevor Lawrence, obviously we talked about earlier in the show how he managed to get that big contract. Does that big contract play out to be a factor? For me, he does finish with 345 fantasy points, which makes him a QB4 in the league. And yeah, over 4,500 passing yards.
So I gave him 314.9, good enough for QB6. No. But I also want to point something out. I mean, that is good enough for QB6, but I did some research, and I don't know if anybody's going to agree with me. Last year was kind of a dud for fantasy.
Yes, very much so.
We never pointed that out, but I was just doing some little research looking on Fantasy Pros, and last 5 years, last year there was 8 quarterbacks with 300 plus fantasy points. The 3 years prior, there was 11. Last year, there was only 7. So the quarterback numbers, at least in that department, are going to be very, up in the air. You're going to see guys probably top 5 that you'd expect to be on the bottom end of top 10. And even a little bit past that. So I don't think Trevor Lawrence, like I said, I have him at quarterback 5 or 6, whatever it was. I don't think he's going to finish that. But I have him at 315 fantasy points. I gave him 4,100 yards, 27 and 13 touchdown interception split. Gave him some rushing work, 400 yards and 5 touchdowns. But I did give Mac Jones a 5% split just in case he gets in there for a game. So
makes sense. I gave him a 2% split.
okay.
So ETN. I don't know if you like ETN, but I have ETN finishing as the RB2 in the league with 319.8 fantasy points. You don't like it? I didn't think you liked it.
No, I don't like ETN either. I think that, well, here's the thing. He'll be fantasy relevant, but as a player, I think he is load dependent. I think that he doesn't rush for a lot of yards per carry. I think it was 3.8 was what he had last year. But he gets the work. So if we're talking about fantasy relevance, sure. I gave him 970 yards and 9 touchdowns and decent receiving work, 423 and 2 touchdowns. So I have him finishing with 256.2. Good enough for last year's RB7, Kyron Williams.
Okay.
So, I mean, I don't like him as a player, and I'm not like crazy high on him in fantasy, but I would probably stay away from him just because he does have injury history as well. So, I don't know.
Okay. And I agree with you on that part that he does have a history with injuries, but I'm a big ETN believer, and I really do think he's going to do very well. He does get 70 targets. 88 targets with 70 receptions. He gets over 500 receiving yards. Other than that, there's no other running back in the category that's somewhat relevant, in my opinion. But going to the wide receivers, this is where it gets interesting because it's a new landscape. Christian Kirk used to be the wide receiver 1 there, and I'm giving him wide receiver 1 stats that he used to have when he played with Trevor Lawrence when they were both the wide receiver QB1. Christian Kirk finishing with 237 fantasy points, making him a wide receiver 16. He's back up on top of that depth chart. Gabe Davis right behind him with 172 fantasy points. But yeah, Kirk gets 9 touchdowns. Gabe Davis gets 7. Brian Thomas gets 4. Thomas has 138 fantasy points. They're all relevant, but the most relevant is Christian Kirk there.
Yeah, I gave Kirk actually a little bit more. I gave him 244.3. Good enough for last year's wide receiver 15. Yeah, I completely agree with you. He's going to get his 100-plus targets. I gave him just shy of 1,200 receiving yards. I gave him 7 touchdowns. I think that he's going to be that guy again. You hit the nail on the head. He had his year of wide receiver 1 in Jacksonville, and he smashed it out of the park. I think he's going to do it again. Gabe Davis, I have 160, and Brian Thomas 121. So Gabe Davis, I think, will be relevant. He's always the guy. It's, home run or nothing. He's going to give you 200 yards and 3 touchdowns, or he's going to give you nothing. So if you have Gabe Davis on your team, it's a hit or miss, and you already know that. Brian Thomas, I think he'll be a solid player, not fantasy relevant just yet. Maybe a few years, sure.
Okay. Lastly, on Jacksonville, Evan Ingram. Obviously, I'm having him over 1,000 receiving yards. He becomes again another top tight end in this league, like he was in the past. And he finishes as the tight end 1 from last year with 260.5 fantasy points.
Wow, that's crazy. So yeah, when I was doing this, I like to reminisce about Evan Ingram because I drafted him. I don't remember if it was his rookie or not, but it was one of his earlier years when he was with the Giants, and he was just god awful. He was terrible. He never did anything. He was actually a pretty hyped up tight end in drafts, so I took a chance on him, and he was god awful. Never did anything. But now he went to Jacksonville, and his first year with them was 2 years ago?
Yep.
Yeah, and he did pretty well. So I was like, all right, I'll draft him. Drafted him last year, and he did so good for me. He was like my secret weapon, which is the reason why I won one of my leagues. And I was so happy with what he did. I didn't give him as much stats as you did, but I gave him 196 points, which is still good enough for tight end 7. But he'll probably do better than that, to be honest with you. I have him at 860 and 4 touchdowns. I wouldn't be surprised if he goes over 1,000.
Yeah, I'm 6 touchdowns with 1,025 yards.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if it's more towards that.
So let's get into the Ohio State Buckeye crew with CJ Stroud. Houston Texans, the final team for today. Gary, let's hear your take on CJ Stroud and where you have him finishing.
I have Stroud just going off. I have him at 4,4750 passing yards.
Okay.
34 and 12. Gave him 200 rushing yards and 3 touchdowns. So he finishes with 340 fantasy points. Good enough for QB4 from last year.
QB4. Okay, well, I have him from last year. He becomes the QB2, which is shocking. But CJ Stroud is going to break a record.
Really?
In the NFL books for this season. CJ Stroud, who just won Rookie of the Year as the quarterback 2 off the board in the rookie draft, he finishes with, you won't believe this, 5,483 passing yards, making him the quarterback with the most passing yards in an NFL season by any quarterback as he breaks Peyton Manning's record. Obviously, he still finishes as QB2. I don't see him getting a lot of rushing yards. He finishes 375.2 in PPR leagues. Obviously, PPR doesn't matter for quarterbacks, but he finishes as QB2. I think I have Josh Allen just above him, but that's because Josh Allen runs more.
I love it. I mean, I can't hate it.
I love CJ Stroud, and this guy is the next big thing.
He's good.
He's the next big thing. I wanted the Patriots to tank so bad to get him, and we just never did. And I've been rooting for that for the last 4 years. It just never happened. But I'm going to go into the wide receivers first, and that's because I have 2 wide receivers getting over 1,000 receiving yards. Matter of fact, I have 2 of them getting over 1,100 receiving yards. I have Stephon Diggs getting 1,242 receiving yards. Nico Collins getting 1,166, and then Tank Dell right behind with 846. I have Stephon Diggs with 279 fantasy points, good enough to become the wide receiver 8. And then I have Nico Collins as at 236 fantasy points. With that 236 makes him the wide receiver 16. This team is elite. If you're drafting for a team, you better be drafting every quarterback, every running back, every wide receiver, every tight end, maybe you could say, for this Houston team, because they're so good. So good.
Yeah, my numbers are definitely going to look a little smaller than yours, but that's just due to the fact that I think there are so many mouths to feed here. That I wouldn't be surprised if you have crazy top-heavy guys, but I also wouldn't be surprised if it's a lot more spread out, which is what I went with. I gave Diggs 231 fantasy points, good enough for last year's wide receiver 16.
Mm-hmm.
So a little bit of a hit for him. But actually, he finished what? 9?
Diggs last year?
Yeah, 9.
Diggs finished 9.
Yeah, so a little bit of a hit for him, and definitely a hit for Nico Collins too. I only have him at 190. I have Tank Dell at 175, but I actually gave Noah Brown a good amount of work too. I have him at 125, so that's where, that's where a lot of the stats went. I gave Robert Woods 100 too, so that's where a lot of the stats go. I just think that, like I said, there's too many mouths to feed, so I think that you're gonna have some games where just like a random wide receiver 4 is going to have like 100, 125 yards, and that takes away a good chunk of what the top guys could have got. But yeah, you said it. This team is so elite. I love Stroud. I'm so happy that, he's doing what he's doing, because he was neglected just due to that stupid test that doesn't even have anything to do with actually playing the game. So, yeah, I can't wait to see what this team does.
For Dalton Schultz, is there a way Dalton Schultz still becomes fantasy relevant for you?
Yeah, Yeah, I'm you know what? Actually no. I'm sorry. I have him at tight end 20.
Wow.
I didn't think it was that far down, but yeah, I gave him 500 yards and 4 touchdowns. So I mean, he'll be relevant on the field, but in lineups, probably not.
He finished last year as a tight end 10. For me, he finishes the tight end 10 as well with 152 and a half fantasy points. Now let's talk about Joe Mixon, the newly added piece to this team. Joe Mixon gets over 1,000 rushing yards. He takes most of the load. Dameon Pierce still gets a good chunk of load, but he doesn't have too much per carry, and that really hurts him for rushing yards. Joe Mixon finishes with 258 fantasy points, making him a solid RB1, finishing as the RB8 from last year. Excuse me, the RB7 from last year.
Yeah, I'm glad we're talking about this right now. Mixon is what makes this team so special, right? I mean, what he brings.
Is he a Buckeye as well?
Mixon, no.
Okay, I just wanted to know.
No, I don't remember where he went. Maybe Alabama. I can't remember right now.
Oh, I think.
But yeah, he's what changes this team. I think that they had Pierce and who else is there? I don't know. Oh, Singletary.
Dare.
And,
yeah.
Singletary, and they were just not good. Dameon Pierce, I never got it with him either. I
liked Pierce.
You did?
I did. He's just not efficient.
Right. That's true. He's not bad. It's just he's not efficient. So many people loved him, and I'm just like, I don't know. I don't get it. I mean, it also comes to the fact that the Texans, when Dameon Pierce first started, a year or two ago, they didn't have the line that they have now, which is not great still, but better than what they had. So, the fact of the matter is, I have Mixon finishing with 233.7 fantasy points. That's good enough for last year's running back 12. He honestly will probably do better than that. I have him finishing with 8 touchdowns. I don't remember how much he had last year, but I think it was 10 or more.
Mixon,
9.
I think he had 9.
Okay, yeah, he had 9. So, yeah, he's always that guy that's going to get the touchdowns. He's just a very, very strong runner. I like him. His injury history was always what kind of was the question mark to draft him, but he didn't get injured last year, I don't think. So, I think he's going to be great for this team. As for Dameon Pierce, I didn't even give him 80 fantasy points. So,
Dameon Pierce, I gave him 65 fantasy points.
Yeah.
So,
I don't think do anything.
So, kind of rounding out the whole AFC side before we end the show, who's your top 3 quarterbacks right now based on our stats? Right now, I have Josh Allen, CJ Stroud, Justin Herbert, Joe Burrow, and Lamar Jackson as my top 5. We'll go with that, top 5.
So, top 5, Stroud isn't in it for me.
Really?
Stroud 6. Yeah, I have to run up the AFC, I have Josh Allen 1, the only quarterback to eclipse 400 plus.
Yep.
Lamar Jackson at 2, Mahomes 364 at 3, Herbert at 4, and Richardson at 340 at quarterback 5.
Yeah, I have Richardson down at 10, and Mahomes at 8. For the running backs, in PPR leagues, I have Breece Hall, Travis Etienne, James Cook, Devon Achane, and Derrick Henry.
Wow. I'm just looking at this right now. Can you say your 5 again? Sorry.
Breece Hall, Travis Etienne, James Cook, Devon Achane, and Derrick Henry as my top 5 running backs for the AFC.
So I have Breece Hall 1, Derrick Henry 2. I'm going to skip 3 for now. Travis Etienne 4, James Cook 5. So 6 I have Gus Edwards.
Who do you have? Like Jalen Warren?
Yes.
I knew it.
That is exactly what I have. Yep.
Jalen Warren is the RB3.
258.8. Yep.
Wow. Going into wide receivers, Tyreek Hill, Jamar Chase, George Pickens, Garrett Wilson, and Stephon Diggs.
Diggs comes in at wide receiver 10 for me.
Wow.
So I have Tyreek, Jamar, Garrett Wilson, Devontae, Zay Flowers.
I have Zay at 8.
Yeah, I got Zay Flowers at 5, Kirk at 6. So, yeah, I mean, I don't know. I think Garrett Wilson is going to have a huge year, just assuming and praying, because I want him to just go off, that Aaron Rodgers will stay healthy. I think if that's the case, he's going to be such a sneaky get. So
yeah, I agree with that. I love Wilson. I think he's going to be really good, but it's really going to come down to the connection between him and Rodgers.
I agree.
And lastly, to round out the AFC rankings, tight ends, top 5, Evan Ingram, Travis Kelce, Mark Andrews, David Njoku, and Brock Bowers.
All right, so Brock Bowers is right outside my top 5. I got Mark Andrews 1, Kelce 2, Dalton Kincaid 3, David Njoku 4, and Ingram 5.
Interesting. I have Kincaid at 7.
I think he's going to have a great year.
I think he will too. Well, I guess that's going to wrap up this week's show. I mean, it was a fantastic show. We wrapped up the AFC. Next week, we're back on Thursday with the NFC. And it's going to be a fun time. Again, if you haven't done so already, go to Underdog Fantasy, use code SportsTimeHQ. They're going to match your first deposit up to $100. And of course, you still have a chance to bet on the final game number 5 of the NBA Finals.
Final game?
Celtics win in 5 here at home in Boston. That's why they lost yesterday and lost by a good chunk, because they didn't want to make sure to celebrate with their fans. Right. But again, go to Underdog Fantasy, use that code SportsTimeHQ. They're going to match your first deposit up to $100. And if you haven't done so already, go to TrophySmack.com/SportsTimeHQ. I bought my league the trophy for the winner in my friend's league. And, it's a great one. I'm going to have to show it off maybe next week if it comes in. Maybe something else, but I don't know. We'll have to see about that other thing that I maybe bought on TrophySmack.com/SportsTimeHQ. Yeah, I got some good stuff. Maybe I'm going to get Gary a toilet bowl trophy, because he is that trophy bowl guy, the toilet guy. Again, TrophySmack.com/SportsTimeHQ. I was joined by my great co-host, Gary Dombeck. Go follow him all over social media at Gary.Dombeck. I'm Fernando. I'm your host of Sports Time HQ. We're going to see you all next Thursday at 6 p.m.